So how exactly did the colleagues of Daniel and the high officials in government use the principle of the rule of law to accomplish actually a greater evil than anything the Babylonians ever tried to do with the Jews? And the answer, of course, is that they didn't just use the rule of law, they used the very essence of what the rule of law means and what it is. In other words, they used the thing which is supposedly its greatest strength to accomplish, to bring about a more just society, and they twisted it and perverted it and then wielded it. As I said, the law was wielded as a lance in order to destroy Daniel. So let's look at what they did here. It says that the high officials in verse 4 and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against, satraps are provincial governors, sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint. Why? Because Daniel was actually just. Unlike many political leaders across history, he was actually just. His private life was just as his public life was. All right? And we're going to come back to that at the end of this as to our next question. Why is it that his character was not like theirs? What differentiated him? So they said, look, we're never going to find a complaint against Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. Because he's so faithful to the law of his God, in other words, Daniel views the law of his God as something higher even than the principle of the rule of law. How dare he put religion above government, above the state? And so they said, look, if we're going to be able to entrap him, the thing we're going to have to do is find a way to use his religion against him. All right, so then what they do is they form a conspiracy, and they go to the king. Okay, now notice what they're going to do is they're going to present a new law to the king. And they need to present it in a way that sounds so noble and just and good and for the betterment of the Persian Empire. Like this is, they can't give any sort of hint that this might have some evil aim in their minds, right? They have to cloak the entire thing in a deception of nobility. All right? Can you imagine people doing that? Politicians doing that? It's hard to imagine it, isn't it, in our day? So anyway, he says, or rather, they approach the king Darius and they say, "O King Darius, all the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects, the satraps, the counselors, and the governors are agreed." Okay, everybody now holds this view. Everybody agrees with us within the sort of under-government of you, O dear king, that there's this law that will truly benefit society, and everybody agrees with it already. It's just hard to imagine anybody would be so evil and stubborn and obtuse as to not agree with the majority of the leaders on this particular law and its fundamental justice. Okay, you see what they're doing? The pressure is already being sort of spread like butter on the bread. And here it is. All we want to do is have anybody who makes a petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, king, you can imagine their explanation. Look, king, Persia has come new into power, and the diverse peoples across the Persian Empire now, including the Babylonians and others like the Jews and so on, Assyrians, they it's sort of dicey, and we need to establish that the gods have shown you unique favor and grace. That's why, obviously, the Persians are in control of the world now, is because the gods have looked favorably on you. So what we want people to do is that if they have a request of the gods, which we strongly encourage, of course, we're not anti-religious. We want religion. We want people to come and offer their petitions to the gods. And if they have any petitions of any high officials as well, we're not putting ourselves in this. This is not for ourselves, you see. This is all for you, King, to establish your stability, to establish your centrality and your excellence, however they want to say it. What we want to do is just have everybody who has a petition just come and lay it at your feet. And then you, of course, could pray on their behalf to the gods so that they all see that in the end, really you are the one that is worthy to rule. And the Medo-Persian Empire has the good favor of the gods. And this is just a sort of a nicety to help people in a kind of ceremonial way to reinforce what the gods have already decreed. See? It's all so noble, right? They're just trying to help Darius establish his empire. And so we'll pass this law, plus it'll remind people that even you, King, are subject to this law, that even you cannot change this law. And that's so important to establish for this new empire, how advanced and civilized we are, and how our ideas, if they take root in the empire, will make the whole empire a more just place to live in. You see? So, you see how easy it is to cloak what they did in such nobility and justice. But of course, all they're really doing is just hijacking the principle of the rule of law because they want to destroy Daniel. They obviously don't like Daniel because he is a Jew. They don't like his religion because it's different from all the other religions. And he, of course, has the good favor, having come from Babylon. Now, under Darius, they don't want him to have the influence he's having. And, of course, he's truly effective in part because he's truly trustworthy. So for all these reasons, they're determined to destroy him. And you can see now that since the law gets passed, and they make he signs the injunction, and then of course I should add to the narrative details here, the drama, that they just happen to be out walking along the street where Daniel's condo is, and they happen to find him in his upper room there, doing what he did every day, 3 times a day. He would look out through his window, open the shutters, and face the temple, the city of Jerusalem, and he would offer his requests to Yahweh, his prayers to Yahweh. And of course, Daniel, who was obviously a law-abiding citizen, was faithful and just, and they had such a difficult time finding him anything he did that was lawless. You see, he didn't do anything that was lawless. He didn't live like that. And so now they have a law against him. And Daniel, of course, knowing that the law is not anything he can submit to, because there is a higher law. He believes in a higher law, and that he's obligated to that higher law. He cannot be silenced in his prayers and worship of God. And so he continues to do what he always does, to worship God, to pray to God. And they just some of them happened to be out there in the street at those points and saw him praying. And so they come as witnesses to the king, and they say, King, just help us, just remind us, because it feels like it just wasn't that long ago. Anyways, but didn't you sign an injunction, a rule? What a noble rule it was, too, a noble law for the benefit of all the subjects of the Persian Empire, that nobody should make a request to God or man except they submit it to you. And the king says, yes, and you can hear the king now. Listen to what he says. He says, the thing stands fast. according to the law of the Medes and Persians, you see. They all said that. Everybody always quoted that line, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked, cannot be changed. You see, the pride just oozing from everybody. This is such a great, noble idea that you can't change the law, and even the king is subject to the law, and so on. And they said, well, it pains us to say this, dear Darius, O king, but Daniel, of all people, Daniel, whom everyone loves and respects, rightly so, king, unfortunately, Daniel has been found in a scandalous, shocking defiance of the very government that all of us think brings about such a noble and just society in the world. What a travesty, treasonous of Daniel. We used to think highly of him, but unfortunately, he has paid no attention to you, king, or the law of the Medes and Persians that you have signed, okay? And, of course, it's all just rank, horrific evil. They're just evil men. In fact, it's noteworthy that these men, that underneath the surface of all this nobility, they are themselves like raging lions hunting their prey, seeking to destroy and devour their prey. Anyway, so what they do, of course, is just hijack the rule of law, and now the king is subject to it. He's distressed, but there's nothing he can do because of the principle of the rule of law. Can you imagine that happening in a place like America? Well, you know, in the early 70s, in the early 1970s, there was a movement to create a more just America. And it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. It didn't go through Congress, of course. It went to the Supreme Court. It's interesting. It's not normally a good thing when new laws get passed through the Supreme Court. Better that they go through Congress. But anyway, this new noble way of thinking about society, which is that a woman, with regards to a pregnancy, it's her own body. And so if she decides to terminate the pregnancy, that should be within the woman's own individual personal right, and neither any other person nor the government should be able to trample on that right. Isn't that must be in the Constitution? That's fundamental to the way Americans think. And so there was this new law, well, basically a new law created through the SCOTUS, through the Supreme Court of the United States. And then what happened for the next 50 years? Well, let me tell you, at that point, even if the majority of society had been against abortion, okay, even if the percentages in polls and so on had the majority of people against abortion, which it did through much of that time frame in the ensuing decades, that you couldn't just agree to just change the law. It wouldn't matter if 75% of the people agreed. It wouldn't matter if most of Congress just agreed. They couldn't just decide one evening, hey, let's just change this. We now think it's evil. How did this happen? This shouldn't happen. They're now butchering babies by the millions. This isn't good for society. How could this be good? How could this be more noble or just? And so you see my point. It wouldn't matter at that point because the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled on it. That's what's in the Constitution. And so 50 or 60 years later, when it came up for debate and the Supreme Court was looking at Roe v. Wade again, and there was discussion in the Dobbs case of whether they would overturn it, what was the language used by people who advocated for that law? They said, look, this is the law of the land, you see. This is constitutional. It's a constitutional right. And it's now the law of the land. So you can't change the law of the land. You can't change what's a constitutional right. And you see, it doesn't really matter at that point what the majority of the population, I'm not arguing, of course, that the majority of America did have a particular strong view The trend has been toward a divided view on abortion. I'm saying it wouldn't have mattered, you see, in one sense. Across all those decades, the millions of babies would have died either way because of the rule of law, because there's no one person who can just look and say, hey, look, the majority of us think this is evil, and so let's just change it. It's not the way the rule of law works, which much of the time is, of course, a very appealing way to govern a society. It adds a conservatism into the way the society is governed. The problem is that once the laws themselves promote evil, if they themselves are promoting evil, now that conservatism accomplishes greater evil because the laws get so embedded and the rule of law is higher than any one person or group of people. Now, of course, this is a somewhat simplistic way to try and look at the American situation. The point is simply that within Daniel's world, in the story itself, it really happened that the rule of law was used to accomplish greater evil. And it was used because of its very essence, that it cannot be easily changed because the law ends up above the people. And so even if the people agree that it's not just, the labyrinthine, the Byzantine process of changing it is very difficult, and so it sort of gets embedded into the society for at least a duration of time that is significantly longer than if you just had an absolute monarch who could snap their fingers and change it. So this is what happened. All right. Now, our next question is going to be about Daniel. If the rule of law, or if a principle of government, like democracy, is not sufficient to transform the inner nature of humans and make this whole society actually a more just society, what was it? Because obviously it didn't work on the politicians, right? The leaders themselves were worse than lions in the sense that they had intelligence and deception and so on, and could cloak things in nobility. At least lions are what they are on the surface. In other words, what's on the inside of a lion is what's on the outside of a lion. So the humans were actually more dangerous and evil than the lions proved to be in our story. But what is it about Daniel? How is it that Daniel actually is on the inside what he was on the outside? What made him more just? What transformed his character? So look at that question, and we'll take it up next time. Best wishes.